Okay, recess is over. We're back. So my question is, do we want to have public comment on the open space before we move on to the rest of biological? Is that where we're at?
Well, we just finished talking about the Oak Woodland.
Oak Woodlands, we haven't finished that yet.
Measure.
Oh, that's when I mean Oak Woodlands. I didn't mean the open space one.
Well, why not finish that unit at least?
Sure, that's just throwing it out there. We can.
Biological.
Okay. All right, moving on then.
Do you have any questions on that one?
I don't have anything further on
I don't either.
that, but I would,
I do.
Wait,
So down at the bottom of page 17.
Well, we're at the,
We're
we're
at
on
the top and we're, yeah.
top of page 17.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, not yet. We'll be getting to that soon, though.
I have some comments on 2F. On page
they've
17.
decided to continue
Not
to
gonna
the
have
bottom of
public
this
comments?
page.
Not just yet.
Okay.
But you're first
bad.
up.
Oh, I'm sorry, I found it, yeah. All right, go ahead.
This is the one that says, support efforts to identify and acquire high-value biological resource areas from willing sellers on private lands. I had thought we had decided to modify that. And the modification I thought we had read like this. Support efforts where needed to identify and acquire high-value biological resource areas from willing sellers on private lands, comma, for the purpose of mitigating impacts to biological resources.
So I had something similar, for purposes of mitigating resources for the purpose of impacts to biological resources.
Very close.
Yeah,
Yes, I missed it.
so, that's fine. So, are you fine with Kelly's?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
You still have it?
I have my original notes and I just
Missed it.
skipped that one
It
for some
happens.
reason. There's just too many scribbles all over my pages. I
Yeah,
just missed
us
it,
too.
so.
Okay.
Three E. This is the vegetation retention. There was considerable discussion on this at the last meeting. I think I said I was astonished that the county would insist on keeping unnatural vegetative growth that should be removed to accomplish some minuscule greenhouse gas emission reduction. It got moved to biological resources, but that doesn't fix the problem. All of this overgrown vegetation creates fire hazards. It reduces the forage and the water and the wildlife habitat. Conflicts with Supervisor Edson's watershed program. If this were enacted, who would decide if vegetation removal was in anticipation of new development? That's a state of mind of the person doing the removing. Might have been years before. Is that going to go to court? Does the planning director decide it? Who decides if this stays in effect? I thought that the planning director was going to bring back a vegetation measure that related to the big picture. And what I see is exactly the same as what we saw before, just moved to a different place. And so I'm not in favor of this.
I'm not sure, what do you mean vegetation related to the big picture?
I think that was the comment before, because I believe that I made comments previously. This vegetation removal implicates a lot of things. It cuts across a lot of different areas, like water and fire protection and wildlife habitat. You know, this
So is
one's
that your
not,
big picture, is like having some wordage that takes into the account?
well, yes, something that does other than just say you can't remove any native vegetation, which includes your chamise, your chaparral, your manzanita, no matter how thick it is or how worthless it is. No, I don't see that. And as a matter of fact, I don't know if this is the appropriate time, but I personally think that this conservation and open space element needs to address that with a completely new goal, new policies, and implementation measures, because none of that is done in this general plan. And we've already heard today that there's a lot of work that has to be done. This is going the wrong direction. This is saying keeping all of this unnatural vegetation that we've allowed to build up over fire suppression in excess of 100 years. You know, there was an article in the latest Farm Bureau magazine. There was a symposium held in Stockton, Rangeland Management Symposium. And according to the article, when ranchers at the summit were surveyed, more than 70% responded that prescribed burns should be used more as a management tool to reduce the risk of wildfire. Quote, "Through the years, we did away with the controlled burns," said Doug Josey's Calaveras County rancher. "When I was younger, I was on a controlled burn every Saturday. Through the years, the brush has taken over. The brush is growing every day, we're making more fuel every day, and it has to be controlled. That's what we ought to be doing, not this."
It's a little apple and oranges if you're talking about controlling brush for agricultural production, and we're talking about controlling brush for development. So slightly, it's a little apples and oranges.
I don't agree.
Brush is
I
brush.
believe that we just got an example and a taste of what it feels like to have a large fire hit your area because we are not managing our growth. And this is encouraging maintaining that native vegetation, and we had a whole conversation about, well, what is native to us? And even though it's regarding new development and discretionary entitlements, we're still not looking at maintaining that vegetation. We're trying to protect it and keep the fire hazards high. And we should be looking at the possibility of saying, hey, you need to remove this vegetation for this development and get it cleaned up so it is a fire-safe community when we're allowing new development to come in. I mean, there's so many impacts surrounding that. What is the purpose when we're saying adopt an ordinance discouraging the removal of the native vegetation, Peter, and vegetation retention? Is that something that has to be in this element, or were we looking for goals and policy around the conservation and open space protections?
The intent of this measure was to look at what happens occasionally is where, in order to avoid the mitigation requirements that are often associated with the development, someone will go in advance, remove all the trees, and then file their application and say, oh, there's no trees on the site, therefore I don't have to mitigate.
Okay, well, this isn't...
I mean, that's sort of a worst-case scenario. The other broader picture is that there is habitat value to the native vegetation. I would agree with Commissioner Wooster. Gone. Too much food at lunch. Brain fart. That, management of the vegetation, or the lack thereof has changed the vegetation to some degree. Where fires used to be a natural occurrence, we've suppressed them. They have now, it's resulted in, overgrown, hazardous situation. It's not the only reason it's there, but that it's part of the situation. So, 2 points. One was specific to the sort of pre-development modification of the land to avoid mitigation, and 2 was more of a generalized look at, what what values are out there as far as, the native vegetation. We could certainly modify this, and I don't know, Kelly, what suggestions you have as far as another goal instead of policies. But now would be the time to do that while we're reviewing this element before we pass it on to the board. So either now, or if we want to bring it back, next meeting.
I would like to do it this meeting, but I think we should get through the draft that's here, and then I'll come back to it.
Okay.
Because it cuts across a lot of subjects. It doesn't really fit nicely into one subcategory over here. So why don't we continue with the draft as it's written, and then I will share with you my thoughts on a new goal, policies, and implementation measures.
So do you have some recommended revisions to 3E? As Mr.
My
Mauer
view is take it out, it's more trouble than it's worth. I mean, how often is it going to be that some developer's going to come in and cut down all the good big old oak trees, which I think has already been established, a decent developer thinks they add value, which they do.
But yet we have a project on the books where they went in and did exactly what you said. I do remember that conversation.
Yeah.
We're dealing with one of those issues now where the bulldozer had some fun.
You know, some things like this are going to happen when people anticipate the government's going to come down on their necks. When this oak tree mitigation program first surfaced many years ago, there was a rancher in Tuolumne County that fixed that little problem. He has bare rangeland now. So when you stick things like this in there, you just make the problem worse. And how are you going to tell, as I said, that something was done in anticipation of new development? You're going to have to judge the state of mind of the person who does the oak tree or native vegetation removal. Could have been for a lot of reasons. Like it was the chaparral patch that was producing absolutely zero and worth absolutely zero.
Well, maybe we can hear from the public on this as well, since we're at that point now, aren't we? And we have several sections for them to weigh in on.
Let me ask Mr. Wooster a question.
Sure.
Does your replacement language deal more with the concept of management than protection, if you will, or preservation?
Yes.
Okay, that I think is the right direction, because it's easier to make that, not just because it's easier, but it makes more sense, because it makes it consistent with the factors that he previously brought out, such as the watershed management efforts, which are huge. Not to mention the needs for ranchers and whatnot to manage vegetation so that grass can grow for animals. And then you have fire on top of that. So there's a lot of reasons to go after this issue from a management perspective rather than a preservation goal, policy. But that said, Mr. Wooster, did you want to continue with this because of the tie-in factors, so that your comments will make more sense after we've been through, say, scenic and recreation and whatnot? Because I don't see the other implications just looking ahead.
Well, I think it just would be better to complete our work on the draft that's before us, and then take up what I would like to take up. But I can do it either way. I just don't want to bog things down. I think we've gone far enough where we ought to be hearing from the public before hearing more from me on what is essentially a new set of provisions. But I'll do it any way you want.
I'd like to hear from the public now, because we have a couple of things out there that areas that we were wanting to have some input on before we move on.
Alternatively, maybe the public would like to hear what Mr. Wooster is suggesting for.
Well, what I would like to do with Mr. Wooster's comments is, as he suggested, is go ahead and finish the rest of the element, and then let's go back to his,
Okay.
so that we do at least, accomplish what we set out to do today, and then, we've got we're on record with that, and then let's talk about additions. Okay. So at this point, if there's anyone in the public that would like to talk about the implementation programs, the measures in general, water resources, water quality, and biological resources, page 15 through page 17.
Tom Sullivan, Arnold. I'm on the fire board up there for about the last 20 years. Prior to that, I fought fire in Southern California for 27 years. And what I'm listening to, and some of you are saying the right things, I would not want to see anything in the plan that would mitigate the ability to make this county fire safe. There's a lot of fire safe movement out there right now. There's natural resources in Cliff Edson's program. And I wouldn't want to see anything that would stop that, even in new development. These new developments sometimes can be in amongst the worst fire hazard you ever saw in your life. Go out to Jesus Maria, take a look. If this fire had been anything like some of the Southern California fires, which we all know that the weather is changing, had any bit wind been on it like we have down there, or used to have down there, we wouldn't be talking about 500 homes, we'd be talking about 5,000. Because up here, resources are not as close as they are in Southern California. So consequently, you don't have the ability to fight that big a fire. And I know Orange County is thought of as another LA, but it's up against the Cleveland National Forest, and several years ago it was just like this county is. I just want to, and I know I'm beating a drum that's already been beaten, and I hope I'm not wasting your time by saying, please don't do anything that would mitigate being able to make this county safer. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, Vicki Mills, and I have a question on COS 1E. It says, continue to participate in and keep appraised of the IRWM. Which IRWM are you talking about? Because there's two, and I don't remember seeing any county vehicles ever at the T-stand. So that makes it sound like you're just going to one of them, which is not covering the eastern part of the county.
Well, it says the water management planning efforts, plural. So whatever is there now and whatever might come out in the future.
That doesn't address my question, Peter, I'm sorry. I'm saying that there is an IRWM called the T-stand, which covers part of Calaveras County. Because of the Stanislaus, it basically covers the Highway 4 corridor. Now, I've been going to the WAC meetings and stuff and the T-stand for almost a year now. And I have yet to see a member of the county at any of those meetings. So I'm wondering if they're just going to the IRWM that covers the western part of the county, because we have two of them here.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying. I'm talking about the land use policy that's in, or the
But it says
measure.
continue. And if you're not already going there, how can you continue to do it? I know I'm arguing semantics and I get caught up in that, but that is my question on that one.
I'm just, it could be that continuing to participate doesn't mean that you're actually going to the meetings, but there may be other avenues of cooperation and education. I'm just suggesting, I don't know.
That's not how it's sounding, though. If you're participating in an IRWM, then you should be going to their meetings. Otherwise, you're
Well,
not
that could be-
participating.
You should be able.
And maybe the word continue doesn't need to be in
Yeah.
there. Just
Yeah.
participate and keep
That's what I'm
appraised.
saying.
Yeah.
Continue, I have a problem with that word. And then on the one we were just discussing, the 3E, I would change it so it starts out with adopt an ordinance consistent with fire protection standards and the need to minimize fire risk regarding the removal. Start out with the fire risk. Start out with fire protection. That's what we're basically looking at as far as the removal of native vegetation. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, Vicki Reinke. I just wanted to, because we're going to go over some of the things that we had just discussed this morning. One of them was the open space. Let me see what the terminology. Sorry, I flipped ahead. Under the general open space zoning district, I know we had a lot of discussion this morning about it, and when I read this, I went back to look at the ordinance or the open space zoning state statutes, and I know we had gotten a copy of the 65910, 65912, and I just want to, I guess it's sort of a question of if I'm reading this right. Again, very concerned about the intrusion on private properties in a lot of what we're doing with this element. So in 65912 was brought up, and that piece says the legislature hereby finds and declares that this article is not intended and should not be construed as authorizing the city or county to exercise its power to adopt, amend, or appeal an open space zoning ordinance in a manner which will take or damage private property for public use without the payment of just compensation. This section is not intended to increase or decrease the rights of any owner of property under the Constitution of the United States. And I guess because I'll be honest, I don't know the Constitution inside and out, but I do know that we are supposed to have rights to our private property. This is why a lot of this stuff is very upsetting, and I don't understand it because that's so far away from what our Constitution would be. So the Constitution, Article 1, Declaration of Rights, Section 1, all people are by nature free and independent and have inalienable rights. Among these are enjoying and defending life, liberty, acquiring, possessing, and protecting property, and pursuing and obtaining safety, happiness, and privacy. So I know property doesn't necessarily mean land. It can be any property you own, but land is one of them. And then in the Constitution, the only place I've found property rights was Article 1, Section 19, and the whole thing talks about property rights, private property, and the government being able to take property for government purpose, not private purpose, but government purpose, and they have to compensate. So that's kind of what Section 19 is about. So that's kind of, I think, most of our understanding of what the government has rights to private property is when they need to condemn it or whatever to put a road in or a school or that kind of thing. So I guess my question is, if this is the law in our Constitution, why do we get away with all this nonsense about how we're going to tell somebody who wants to develop their private property that they have to save this for open space and they can't put something here because there's a pond? Or I guess it's sort of a question, but not really. But how do you deal with that, I guess? And I thought that was a point that came up to me when I read this stuff, and I know you guys have discussed some of it. But anyway, I just wanted to bring that out at this point. And then as far as the last item that you guys were talking about, I agree with Mr. Wooster that needs to be just deleted. Let's see, where was 3E, vegetation retention? Yeah, the same thing, where that just makes no sense. So I think I just wanted you to know that I agree. Thanks.
Thank you.
Peter Reyes, Jenny Lynn. I'd like to echo what Vicki, what a subject matter brought up, and I'd like to see it maybe considered in a broader line. Integrated regional water management planning efforts. Well, there's an agency that thinks that they are the one who basically making policies and decisions on all water issues, and they represent the county on water issues in this county, both to the feds and state. And it's because of that, somehow, the Board of Supervisors give him a substantial amount of money. And it's not being fair to a lot of the water districts that are struggling, and their property tax subsidizing this other agency, which has basically 15,000 connections. And there's a whole bunch of smaller districts that try to survive. And it should be the Board of Supervisors making policies for us water management in the whole county. And there should be COS/1E, integrated management, integrated regional water management. I believe there should be one organization speaking on management, and you can have all the different independent water districts do the service, and they should get their appropriate property money, property share. Because it's not fair to a whole bunch of, like Valley Spring, for instance, and the planning department will gonna say, hey, we want to develop here or there, and they are supposed to be responsible to getting the proper services in there. Consider that, let the politicians, the accountable elected officials in the county take care of the political and management portion of it, and let the service district run according to Prop 218, totally by Prop 218, and hold responsible as a business to be plumbers, what they should be, according to water code. Right now, it's going 20 different directions. It's not this management of the water in the county. They assume everything from Tuolumne County to Amador County. There should be one speaker for water management. And there's a duplicate of expenses. Tuolumne County, both the county and the water district contribute to it, $16,000 each. Well, it's all coming out of private property taxes. And they went different ways, so they say basically they nullify each other's policy. McCollum Watershed, the same thing. The county went one direction, and the water district, CCWD, went the other direction. And it's totally screwed up, folks, in this county. Plus, it's costing your constituents double money. And it's still not getting the things done. Go back to where the supervisors created this. Get the management, administration to the county and their elected officials, and let the service, what these agencies provide, just do service. Either it's a service district or it's a political body. But it costs your constituents, me and everybody else, double. Sometimes they go together, sometimes the opposite. But it should be one organization, one body, elected body, be speaking concerning water policy. And not just, well, we're just going to keep going the way it has been, because it's been very expensive, wasteful, inefficient, and let's just say, I put it mildly, corrupt. When you spend your tax money, $1.5 million on judgment against the district, that's your money. I don't care if it's insurance or lawyers, but just $1.5 million judgment against the district. That's a no-no.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Hi, Colleen Platt. I've got notes all over my pages, too. I hope I can follow them. Okay, to get back, I'd like to comment on 3 of the measures. To get back to COSA, Open Space Zoning District, I'd just like to clarify the language that we ended up with there. Is it still titled Open Space Zoning District, even though we got rid of the term zoning district in the text? Is that correct?
I don't think we got rid of zoning district in the text.
Yes.
Yeah, we did. Yeah.
Okay,
And
We
I
did a
think
lot.
it'd be appropriate to change the title as well.
okay.
Yeah, that seemed like a contradiction there. Okay. So zoning district would come out of the title then?
Yeah.
And then I think you eliminated then the first sentence, consider creation of an open space zone or equivalent, right? For the
Say
new
again, please.
language.
Maybe just have Peter read it. What did we?
Review county.
Might be.
Review the county code and revise as necessary, or adopt a new open space zoning ordinance pursuant to section 65910, comma, as a means to identify lands which have been dedicated to open space purposes for managing unique, important, or significant natural and cultural resources.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I wasn't sure the word zoning ordinance got in there, so I wanted to make sure that got in there so we complied with the state law, which says that's what we need to do. So, okay, thank you. Okay, and then on to the oak woodlands and the interim measures that there seems to be a lot of discussion about. So the last sentence in the interim, and we do need interim measures, even though maybe we haven't been putting them in place for everything, we will need them in the EIR. There will need to be interim measures. So since we already have one in place, I would suggest following the one that we already have in place as an interim measure. And if it's a problem with the actual specific language in there, maybe you could just say, in the interim, the county will continue to apply the mitigations that have been in place in the existing, planning department oak woodland guidelines, something like that, that could, and then those could be adjusted if necessary down the road, but at least it complies with the intent here is to have an interim standard in place, and it has been working, as both of you, Ted and Fawn, said. This has been in place and has been working and has facilitated projects moving forward without coming before the commission and having to argue over every little tree on the project. At least when you've got the guidelines in place, you've got something for the projects to work with so they can move forward. So I would think you would want to keep that in place, both to comply with the general plan guidelines and to facilitate projects in the interim period. So I would just encourage some language in that sentence that uses your existing guidelines. It doesn't make it so specific because that's already there. That's just a suggestion there. And then going down to COS 3E, the vegetation retention. I agree with Kelly. I thought that there was going to be a little bit of language revision in that. I thought there was going to be some rewriting and possibly even splitting it into 2 separate things. One specifically to protect the pre-development people coming in and cutting down oak trees to get by that thing. I thought that was going to be one focus, and that might have even gone under oak woodlands. That would be one way to look at it. And as Peter said, I think he said there was 2 goals in this vegetation retention. One is that pre-development avoidance, and then there was another goal, and I'm not clear if that was fire suppression or vegetation, but it might help to separate out those 2 things and rather than trying to work them all into one statement. So if I would support the pre-development mitigation for oak trees specifically, and maybe the language instead of discouraging the removal of native vegetation, put in discourage the removal of oak trees. I mean, if that's the argument, whether we're talking about chaparral or whether we're talking about oak trees, make it clear that that's the purpose of that goal anyway. And then if there's a different purpose for the vegetation in general, deal with that separately in different language. So I think that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Tanya Dowson from Valley Springs, and this whole process concerns me quite a bit, and especially, well, the whole process in general, but the part here about the oak trees and, preventing developers from coming in and cutting down their oak trees. If somebody buys a piece of property, that's their property, and if they buy the trees on the property, those are their trees, and if they want to cut them down, in America, they should be able to cut them down. It's not the government who owns the trees, it's the person who purchased the trees. And just the attitude that the government has a right to tell people how to develop their property and what to develop and where to develop and all that, instead of letting the free market and the owners decide. To me, that is disturbing. I don't feel like I'm in America anymore. I feel like I'm in some, European country, and I don't want to live in a European country. I want to live in the United States of America with our freedoms and our freedom to own property and do with our property what we do want to, as long as we're not hurting other people. So I'm concerned. I don't want to see people not be able to cut their trees down if that's what they want to do. So thank you.
Thank you.
Robert Garibaldi. I live on Highway 26 in the Butte Fire. I guess I'm probably going to sound like a broken record here, but I agree with the last speaker. She said it more eloquently, but I feel that probably the reason why the oak protection was put in was to stop development. I just come to that conclusion after the second speaker spoke before me. Now, getting to what I was going to say, the one issue that actually was scratched was the scenic highway. What I was trying to target was the building up on top of the hill, which I guess that's been scratched. But, I was talking to my wife the other day about building up on top of the hill, and she says, "What for? What are we going to look at? We got 440 acres, and the next ranch over is burnt. What scenic view do we have in that place? I mean, it's all burnt." So that's our plight. But as far as the brush to prevent these fires, I feel, you said that there was a law on the books. The chairwoman said that we could clear around 100 feet around our house. Well, we were so inundated by these environmental tales that we couldn't do anything. We didn't know this. In the future, to help other people save their place, why don't we get the fire department to go around and tell these people what they should do and what's on the books and what they can do? And maybe in the future they could save their place if they did it right. I think there should be a roundtable discussion on that by retired firemen and a lot of other people that are very knowledgeable. And let's see, I think I'm kind of losing it here. Geez, I can't remember everything. That's the trouble when you get old, your memory kind of goes, But let's see, what else I had more to say too, doggone it. Well, I guess maybe I'll think about it later.
You'll have another opportunity.
Yeah, okay, thank you very much.
so we'll check in again? No? Okay. So it looks like we've worked our way around COSA, with the open space, right? Okay, and there was a proposal to change COS-1E to just start with participate.
I'm in agreement.
Agreed.
All right, so
I
we're
have
good
a
with,
question about that.
so but we're good with that, and then
Yes.
you can go, we're good with that, right?
Yes.
Trying to get us around the corner here. All right, so then what was your question?
With Mr. Race's comments, Mr. Mauer, would you say that had more to do with county charter issues than general plan issues? In terms of the issue that he's talking about is what political body controls what administrative bodies implement.
Yes,
I know there was a change in the county some number of years ago with respect to water district, political.
Right.
And that was changed at what level? The charter level? Am I saying the right word here?
Yeah, I don't know, I don't believe that we have a county charter, but it was something that was done at the higher administrative level of the board and the ability to establish the county water district. And I don't know the history and I don't know all the details of that. But we could certainly, because each district in the county has to be consistent with the general plan, it's not inappropriate to put policies in the plan that address the overall coordination and direction. And I think that as we get into the public facilities services element, we'll see a lot more of that, which would be the next one I'm working on. So this is talking primarily about water quality.
Okay, so in
And
the
some
public
degree quantity.
services section, looking ahead, and maybe Mr. Race would want to come back with the same kind of comment, it would be appropriate to include a policy of addressing the overall water management systems for inefficiencies in terms of management dollars or management inefficiencies because of duplication of efforts or unnecessary levels of bureaucracy, not bureaucracy so much, but political entities. Is it appropriate for a general plan to include a look at that issue?
I think so, yeah.
Okay. Then I'm going to suggest to Mr. Race to come back at us when we get to the next element, which is the next element we're
Yes.
dealing with, and express the views targeted to that
And if
area.
Mr. Reyes has some very specific policy language he'd recommend, that would be very helpful.
Always.
And I'd, welcome the specific suggestions that people provide. It's hard for me to read people's minds sometimes. Not always, but sometimes.
You just put a lot of pressure on Peter, you realize that, right?
So then, moving on to COS 2D Oak Woodlands, there was Colleen had suggested that we need to keep the existing mitigation in place. And one of the things that she brought up was the need to provide some standards that developers can comply with without having to come to the Planning Commission and duke it out on a case-by-case basis, and that is why those guidelines were put in place.
Okay, I have a question about this that I think that also ties into 3E. The Oak Woodlands Preservation Act, 2014. In this particular component, in 2D, we are talking about projects. in particular discretionary projects.
Right.
What does the act say, what does the act offer or require apart from consideration of discretionary projects? Does it go into, what else? I mean, it's not limited to projects or discretionary project, is it? Does it have anything to offer other than oak preservation related to projects?
I don't recall specifically what it says about non-discretionary project approval. I'm sure there is language in there that talks in general about protecting the oak woodland resources.
Okay.
But are there specific requirements that say we have to apply those on ministerial type of development, or even just day-to-day operations of someone's land?
Well, does it give us any guidance that would serve as an interim standard?
No, I don't believe so.
We're required to comply with this act, but it's not telling us how to do that?
Right.
We can come up with our own rules for complying with this act and then hope that they pass muster? Is that how it works?
Pretty much, yes.
Then it all gets to, do you agree with Ms. Platt that an interim standard has to be in place on this particular
I don't think-
issue, oaks, versus the many other issues that we deal with on
It doesn't have to be. Is it desirable? Is there value to it? Yes, I believe so. Could we continue to do it on a ad hoc, case-by-case basis if we've been doing it before? Certainly. Is there, are there other areas of concern where we might want to adopt interim standard? Probably. The reason this was pointed out was because we had it already. We've been using it, so that's why this one was identified. I suspect that as we go through the EIR, other interim standards may be identified, and we may want to consider adding those after the draft EIR is.
Okay, I wanted to mention why I see a connection with 3E. If, as you made mention, the real thrust of this was to, I guess, protect oak trees from being bulldozed in anticipation of a project. Okay, and as Mr. Wooster said, how do you know what anticipation is? However, if the 14th Act, 2014 Act, addresses oak tree preservation in some other, other aspect other than discretionary projects, then this protection of oak trees in 3E could be moved to 1E, 2D, and eliminate 3E altogether, or replace it with this management component that we are going to be discussing. So if the jewel in the crown is oak trees on 3E, and that's really all it really cares about, and there's verbiage that addresses that in the 14th Act, why not include oak tree retention, if you will, into 2D that is directed to other than discretionary projects, to make it more complete. And then we can deal with management issues, as I think we should. But if we don't have in mind what all is included in the Preservation Act of 2014, then maybe we can't accomplish that here and now. That still leaves the interim issue because you say there aren't, the act does not give you standards
Right.
to go by.
That's correct.
Okay, so the one issue is incorporating Oaks up here where it has nothing to do with the discretionary project. If there's guidance, then we can plug it in here. On the interim replacement standard, then that's, I understand Ms. McLaughlin's issue that there's a benefit to having a standard so that every project doesn't come before us and we hassle over whether that's, you've done a good job or you haven't done a good job on your mitigation efforts. But the science behind this 3-to-1 canopy replacement, it just isn't there. It makes no sense. There's so many ways of looking at this, and I think the unintended consequences that I can even foresee are draconian, if you will. I hate that word, but you understand that this canopy thing is a real issue, and how you look at it, and it makes no sense to me that you can't manage an oak grove, an oak canopy, a stand of oak in some other way than just calling it a plot of green when you look at it in the summertime from the satellite. So the 3-to-1 factor is a huge problem for me.
So I would
You're going
agree.
to run out of land. At 3-to-1, you run out of land at some point. You just do. Every time you take out an acre, if you have to replace it with 3, eventually you run out of acres. You can't do it.
You can bank your money.
Theoretically,
Yeah,
yes.
then you're looking at, then you go to some other county and say, can we buy some of your bank?
So to the degree that the gist of 3E was to protect oak trees, we could add a phrase at the end of the first sentence of 2D, and address pre-development removal of oaks.
The first sentence?
Yeah, which is actually everything but the interim procedure. So at the end of that first part, relative to mitigating significant direct and cumulative impacts to oak woodlands in conjunction with discretionary project approval, and address pre-development removal of oaks. And that would sort of address, somewhere in that program, we would look at.
That was the idea.
Yeah, that's the idea. And we'll figure out the details of, were the oaks truly removed in order to avoid mitigation, or was there some other, there's ways that you can look at that, and if, clearly it was, had no, it was done 10 years in advance or 20 years before because they wanted the area for grazing, and clearly that wasn't for removal. But if it just happens to be right with the path where the road was going to go, you can tell. Usually when it's done to avoid, counting it for oak woodland purposes, or if it was for some other purpose. So but we can come up with those details as we develop that program.
What's the language again, Peter?
And address pre-development removal of oaks.
And where would that go?
Go at the end of the
First sentence.
the first sentence.
Right before in the interim.
It's a long first sentence, approval.
It's the only first sentence, yeah.
And then what happens to the last sentence?
Well, I guess that's up to you guys.
That's the next question.
That's the
Well-
policy call that you're debating.
And I'll just say, I don't know how long I've been on you've been on a long time, I've been on, 8 years or something. How many times have we had an oak canopy project? We're not talking about very frequently. I don't think it's been a huge problem. I think.
It was probably a bigger problem in
When there was a lot of
2004
development, yes.
through 2007, and then once development stopped, it hasn't been a big problem.
Like Oak Canyon and those
Right.
kind of things, it comes out of other.
Right.
Normally it doesn't. No.
And the other thing is, and it could be that the value of it outweighs its your draconian definition.
I hate the word, and it's over.
Well, it works.
It's overkill.
Yeah, but-
Okay, I just couldn't come up with a better word.
And that it does, in a situation, it provides some guidance to create it's a standardized procedures so that it doesn't become subjective and come before us, and you're adding another layer, adding another expense. You know, it is a way to mitigate, when you have that canopy, the impacts of it.
I think at this point, I'd almost rather have, I'd rather look at a project on a project-by-project basis rather than have a standard. And this is why. A developer could come to us and say, okay, here's what's going to happen if, you know, my plan goes through, and it's going to affect some oak trees, and I've got this great idea for, you know, fixing the situation. And we haven't come up with any mitigating programs in addition to the 214 Act as this implementation measure says. But here comes one from the developer himself or herself. So in the many years that you've dealt with this, it hasn't come up because there hasn't been a heck of a lot of development.
Not a lot, true. But my response would be time is money. You know, anytime you say you're going to come before the planning commission, time is money. If you're a developer, I think you just want to know give me the game rules, give me the rules, and I'm gonna just like get out of my way. I mean, that is not a very business-friendly approach.
Well, we heard a long time ago from Keith Talia that when somebody comes in to develop something, they don't go to the general plan. They go to the departments in the county that are responsible for whatever they're going to do. Putting in the general plan on this idea that gives people notice, I don't think holds water in the real world. The other thing is, sure, you can put 3-to-1 in here and you have certainty and all of the rest of it. That's the vice of it too. It's locked into the general plan. It makes no allowance for different habitat losses, if any, depending upon what kind of oak canopy is being removed. You could be removing oak canopy and doing nothing but good for the habitat. Yet you'd still have to replace it with 3 times the amount of oak canopy. Makes no sense.
And again, this is an interim measure.
Which again, could last a long time and remove the motivation to come up with real measures. As Mr. Tuno pointed out earlier.
All right, so perhaps with this, maybe we should just go and kind of take a vote about the last sentence so we can move on. Is there need for more discussion?
We're striking the last one.
That's what we're going to take a show of hands for, striking the last one.
I
If you
think
could
that's a
just,
good idea.
so, who would like to have the last sentence struck?
Me,
Me?
All right, so it's struck. So, okay, moving on. There was a revision that wasn't captured in 2F, which Peter has. And then now we're on 3E, which was vegetation retention, and we've taken that out and added it to 2D, right? Yeah, 2D.
Correct.
Okay.
Component, yes.
And then there also was, I
So
think, this-
3E is deleted at this point?
yes, right?
3E is, right,
Deleted.
correct.
Except it's still in this, maybe what Kelly is going to be talking about later that Colleen Platt brought up was the whole idea about, you know, there's really sort of 2 ideas going on here, the pre-development and then the more the management, fire suppression, watershed thing. And that may be, I think, what you're going to be suggesting later, so.
Well, let's say it's at least in limbo,
well,
What's in limbo?
3E is out.
No, 3's out,
okay?
yeah.
And we're adding language to the end of the first sentence of 3D
Right,
and address the pre-development removal of oak trees.
Right.
correct.
But I'm just saying the other sentiment that was talked about might be more what Kelly's going to be discussing later as we move on. So I think we're moving on?
Yes.
Okay. Air quality greenhouse gases, page 18.
I have comments about 3D, but it affects 3C. So if somebody has something before that.
You have comments on which one?
3D, but, well, 3D and 3C. But 3D affects 3C. My comments on 3D affect 3C. If you've got something before that,
Well, 3B
Go ahead.
Does the Assembly Bill 32 have any requirements that the county establish baseline levels of GHGs? Because the way this reads, it sounds like it does.
I assumed it did because of the way it reads.
Yeah. So again, AB 32 looks at statewide emissions and establishes statewide goals. The language here is that we're looking at emission sources in order for us to address our part of the statewide goals.
But
So-
I guess the
It
question.
doesn't mean that we have a certain target that we, Calaveras County, have to meet that's been established by the state.
Okay, so we're going with the state.
But, the state has said that everyone's responsible to do their fair share, their part of reducing greenhouse gases. And this first measure here is just do an inventory. What is it we have right now? What is it that we are, we don't, probably, I think maybe the question is that reference back to the requirements of AB 32.
Yes.
We probably don't need that last phrase in there, starting with consistent with. I think that was just to give it some reference of why we're doing this.
Well, it might be more than that. And now that I understand 3B better, my comments on 3D are going to affect both B and C. And I'm going to suggest that we jump to 3D because it's the kingpin to all of this. It's developing this plan. What you do in developing the plan has to do with your baselines, if you will have them, and your target goals. It's 3D that's the key. And I don't want to jump in ahead of Mr. Wooster, but that's where I think we ought to start, and we're going to find ourselves backing up from there. Okay.
Go ahead.
Then, as I was mentioning earlier this morning, inasmuch as the 32 requires us to make a contribution to the statewide goal, and where a big city, it's clear what how to comply. They, reduce the amount of traffic and have more buses or more trains, electric trains or whatever. That's kind of an easy model to go by. Here, as I mentioned, we could actually grow significantly in terms of amenities and businesses and job-producing businesses and commercial development and whatnot, and affect a reduction regionally or statewide, okay? If you did the numbers. I don't know how to do such a model. I'm sure it's very, very complicated. But when, as these policies suggest, you take the number we're producing now, and you look at reducing it by 15% or pick a number, by reducing it by any amount, could be counterproductive to reducing greenhouse gases on a statewide level or even a regional level. So if reads 32 to mean that they have to find a way to reduce the greenhouse gases in their county, produced in their county, you're not necessarily going to have the bigger effect. The bigger effect would be that we become a more self-sustaining, self-reliant entity or area. So you can see how my feelings about 3D knock B and C right out of the picture.
No, I don't see that. I
Okay.
think that ultimately whatever we do to affect globally or statewide, the greenhouse gas is also going to have a net reduction here locally.
Why would it have to have a net reduction here locally? Why couldn't we show through modeling, somebody's better arithmetic than mine, that an action here, that action taken here in the county reduces greenhouse gases in the state, because instead of this amount of great movement, we've now reduced it to this amount?
But wouldn't that also occur within the county itself?
No, not necessarily. It might take, you might increase your greenhouse gas emissions in this county by 1%, let's say. I'm just picking a number. But by increasing it here 1%, you've reduced it in the region by 10%. You reduced by a factor of 10.
Maybe you could have an
suppose it's
asphalt
feasible.
plant.
And that's an example. That is an example. But let's just say you took commuter traffic. If you have 1,000 people, I don't know how many people from our county commute to Stockton and Sacramento. Those are some pretty lengthy commutes. If you took 100 people that currently commute an hour each way, and suddenly there was, hypothetically, suddenly those jobs were moved to Calaveras County, and the commute was almost nothing. But the employment, the place where they found employment, there was a greenhouse gas emission from that site. I don't know what they're doing, but let's just say they're doing something, and there's some emission, even if it's just the heating of the building from the propane heating source, let's say. You have an increase in greenhouse gas emission from the county, but in compliance with your duty to reduce it overall as part of your the state plan, you've done a tremendous amount of reduction.
Because what you're saying is the commute from once you cross the county line, that greenhouse gas is in another county, and it wouldn't be attributed to Calaveras County. So someone driving from Valley Springs,
I'm just talking total miles.
yeah, someone driving from Valley Springs to Sacramento, I mean, if we consider the trip start as being in Calaveras County, then even if they're, commuting to Oregon, that reduction would, I don't know how you calculate the individual trips, but I think that we look at the overall trip reduction as, if we're, unless, so then, I hear what you're saying as far as the number of vehicle trips that would be reduced, would compensate for a new development that might have an increase.
More than
But I think that the net would still be positive for Calaveras County.
Yes, it would be. It could be positive. It could be positive for Calaveras County, but in doing so, we've actually done a better job of complying with the goals of AB 32 than
Absolutely, yeah, and I think that's in the whole concept of 3D is, we look at what we can do to contribute to statewide improvement.
right. And by taking that approach, then coming up with a baseline and targeting a number reduction from the baseline could be absolutely counterproductive. It could keep us from doing a better job by means of these other other policies.
I don't see how, if we're making a net reduction, that's still, it's going to be, how whatever it is we do that's going to be an increase is somehow going to be a decrease overall. It's always going to be, if what we do that has a slight increase here but a larger decrease over here, it's still a decrease.
The net decrease.
Net decrease.
A net increase or decrease?
Decrease.
If you decrease it here, look, yes, everything stays the same, and you are able to somehow decrease greenhouse gases produced from Calaveras County, then you can sit back and you say, we've done our job. That's true. Mm-hmm. But if you But there are plenty of ways where you can actually increase your greenhouse gas production here and decrease the greenhouse gas production statewide by a greater margin. The goal of AB 32 is not that each community get cleaner. The goal of 32 is that the state gets cleaner. And you can increase the cleanliness of the air in the state by taking measures which reduce the amount of vehicular traffic, because instead of people having to commute 50 miles one way, they commute 5 miles
Right.
one way.
I don't mean to be rude, but could you please explain to me what it is that you want to do with B, C, and D?
You're not being rude.
Okay, because it's just going on in a circle, and it's like,
Okay, starting with D,
Okay.
which is where I think the starting point is. It says, develop a GHG, greenhouse gas reduction plan outlining the strategies, goals, and actions for reducing municipal and community-wide greenhouse gas, as necessary, yada, yada, AB 32. If instead it said, develop a greenhouse gas reduction plan, or develop, pardon me,
What if we just strike municipal and community-wide?
I've got a note here, contributing to an overall reduction. Okay, develop a greenhouse gas reduction plan outlining the strategies, goals, and actions for contributing to an overall, or statewide, if you will, reduction in greenhouse gases to meet the mandates of, et cetera, 32.
okay, so if we just delete the two words that he talked about, it almost says everything you said in, like,
No. If you eliminate reducing municipal and community-wide greenhouse gas, and you replace it with contributing to an overall reduction in greenhouse gas.
That works for me.
perfect.
Do you understand?
Yep.
Now, if you do that, let me just make sure I've got another note here. Yeah. Okay, if you do that, then going backwards to 3C, well, 3C is tied to 3B. You eliminate both of them.
I'm stuck on 3D. Tell me again what the proposal is.
Okay.
And it would just say develop, not development of. Like you're saying that, but let's agree on that. Develop instead of development of.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm not touching the first part.
Well, I would suggest it would read better develop A instead of development of.
Oh, I'm sorry, I'm not following you. Go ahead and read how you suggest.
Just 3D, just instead of development of, just say develop A and then
Oh,
continue
sure.
on. You were saying it, so I mean, it makes
Okay.
sense.
Develop a greenhouse gas reduction plan outlining the strategies, goals, and actions for contributing to an overall reduction in greenhouse gas emissions as necessary to meet the mandates of AB 32.
Right.
Hang on a
That's your
second.
proposal.
Hang on a second. Okay, now the phrase "as necessary to meet the mandates." I don't think you need California's Global Warming Solutions Act part of it, because you define it up above. But you're not going to do this all by yourself to meet the mandates statewide. Same problem we had before. Why don't you say consistent with AB 32 or something like that?
Oh, so instead of to meet the mandates, go consistent with?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, now I'm no longer stuck on 3D.
Okay.
Okay, I can.
And are
that's
you
workable.
striking California's global warming solutions and just doing AB 32?
Yes,
Said-
because it's already been
Okay,
defined up in 3B,
okay.
assuming we keep 3B.
Well, in my view is that we no longer need 3B or C, because
Well, I
following
think B
through,
and C are sort of Those are the steps to get to D.
Well, they were steps to get to the D the way it read before, because we were going to reduce within.
Well, I
Now,
think
we may reduce within, but we may not.
But you still need to know what your
You still
major
have to
sources
establish
are.
a baseline.
How could you mark a reduction
because
unless
he's-
you know what
Not
your,
necessarily.
Because he's going with
All you
a
have to do
state
is
baseline,
model.
and there is no county baseline.
Correct. There doesn't need to be a county baseline, because you're not going to measure against a baseline anymore. You're going to simply model the changes that you're going to make, all
Well,
the
then we'll
things.
have to do a statewide
You've got
baseline.
that's
plant
right,
life
then you're
and-
going to have to monitor and have a statewide database to know what impact we might have had.
No, they don't have that now. They
No,
don't.
no, no, but we will. We'll need to develop one for them.
I'm not following you, Fawn. You're going to have a,
If we don't have some way to, how do we know how we contribute if there's a net reduction? How do we know if we contribute if we don't have an idea about what our starting point is? Even if it is statewide, that we're contributing, and by us doing this, we're having, there's a net reduction statewide, how are we going to know? If you don't know, if you don't know what your starting point is, at least, that you've got 10 versus 2, we don't know. And if you end up with 12.
as long as you don't use your baseline as a measurement that you can't increase from. You can establish a baseline, that's fine. But it doesn't mean that you can't go up from there. You understand?
I understand that, but where you're saying we shouldn't even have a baseline.
But somehow we have to demonstrate that.
You can model the effect. You can model it's a subtraction or it's an addition. That's not hard to do. You might not know the percentage of subtraction or addition, but this was arbitrary anyway. Right, the 15%, that was,
I don't recall where that came from. I think it was part of the prior, and that may come straight out of the act.
okay,
Yeah.
fine. If the act requires that we make a 15%, I don't know how it can possibly do that. A county like Calaveras couldn't make a 15% reduction in a contribution to the overall state. That's not possible. And they can't,
But our percentage of it. If our percentage is 2% of the overall state, what's 15% of the 2%?
Tiny.
That's a small reduction.
does the act read that each county needs to reduce its greenhouse gas, or does the county needs to make a contribution to the overall?
Well, I think that would probably be the most logical way that jurisdictions would do it, is look at what we can do internally. Because I can't affect what San Joaquin County does or LA County does. We can affect what we do here in Calaveras County.
But San Joaquin affects what we do, because it all comes up here.
Well, we're talking about, it's not talking about pollution. We're talking about greenhouse gases that are, so I think it's important that we have a baseline. And we may find that there are things we could do that have an increase here, but have a greater decrease
Fine.
outside of our jurisdiction.
I'm fine with the
And
county
I-
coming up with a baseline if that's,
Yeah.
just as something to measure against, that's fine. As long as you don't then target your goals, which,
Well, so the way this is going to be
C
used
does.
ultimately is as projects move forward and we get more and more pressure from the state to say, okay, we now have a 100-unit subdivision and we have to analyze its effect on greenhouse gases with the environmental document they're preparing for that. What have we done to show that we're addressing the issue of greenhouse gases? And we can point to provisions in this reduction plan saying, okay, we've done X, Y, and Z, and we're applying that to this project. And that will get us in the direction. There's no like sort of magic goal, bing, you've hit your 15%, you win the Cupid doll. But we have to keep demonstrating that we are moving in that direction. We're applying policies and standards to development that say, okay, whatever those provisions are, maybe it's more energy efficiency within the construction of the building itself. Maybe, there are, as someone pointed out, that, vehicular exhaust and emissions are one component of it. A much larger component is power generation that is then used in the electric lights in this building and heating and air conditioning systems, throughout the county. So if there's ways we can, have more energy efficient building construction, utilizing natural landscaping for shading so we don't have to use air conditioning during the summertime. Those are things we can do and things that can be applied at a project level to say, okay, there's a cumulative impact statewide on greenhouse gases, and we're doing our fair share, and it's consistent with our plan, therefore we have mitigated that impact. With that project, we don't have to do anything more. We don't have to analyze it any further.
So why do we?
That's the point. That's the bottom line of what we're trying to get at. And I think by having that level of standard and showing, okay, here's where we are today, here's where we want to get to, and here are the things we're going to try to do to get to that, and if we're applying those to future projects, then we're able to move forward without having to readdress the issue every time.
There's an important
Excuse me,
detail.
we'll have public comment in a little while.
Okay, but it's
No,
not
but-
15%, it's
Okay,
1990
excuse me.
levels.
We're going to have public
Okay.
comment shortly.
Okay,
Thank you.
I don't think 3B, the baseline, is a particular problem. I think the trouble starts with 3C.
So see, with 3B, I am having an issue because what this sentence is saying is that we're going to get a baseline on all major emission sources. How many tests are we going to do?
I
What
don't
do you
think we
consider
have.
major in our county?
Hardly. I would think the list is pretty small.
Yeah,
I don't- yeah.
it's a fairly routine task that consulting firms have done for a number of jurisdictions. It's not that expensive. El Dorado did it 5-8 years ago through a grant from PG&E. You know, the utility companies are really under the gun to try to reduce their emissions because they're one of the biggest emitters. And so they're helping communities develop these programs to get us to where the state wants us to be.
Okay, and then when we were working on this legislation at the state level on AB 32, and I was going to bring it up and Tanya went up to the mic, but that reduction level, the 15% target, I don't remember that 15% being a part of the legislation. Scenario pursuant to guidance provided in the AB 32 scoping plan. I think if we put a number in there, we're setting expectations that we will maybe never meet because I just said all major emissions and you're saying we don't have that many. So for us to be able to meet a reduction level of 15% if we don't have that many, that's a pretty high expectation. We'll never meet, but yet we've put it in writing. So I would like to see that in the interim, I don't even see why we need that.
Well, it gets us to the same question we had on the prior issue, an interim standard.
Well, if you just had the baseline in 3B, and you had the reduction plan to contribute to the overall state reduction in 3D, I don't see why you need 3C, because
That's it.
3C takes you back
That's right.
to some kind of an in-county reduction standard, which is not what the state law requires. And I agree that it's maybe impossible to meet.
That would be my concern, is we're not going to meet it. If you read, Peter, if you go from 3B and Fawn, if you read through this into 3D, not reading 3C, don't you think that those two together are meeting and are consistent with AB 32 requirements at this point? Adding 3C is adding a layer of regulation on ourselves. Or is there anything in there, is there a single sentence in there that you need to grab out of that, Peter, to feel more comfortable that we should put into 3B? Instead of having both of those?
I guess the only line that's really critical is the established target reductions in GHG emissions to achieve reduction goals of AB 32, and we could insert that into 3D.
Well, we had the same issue before. We're not going to achieve the goals of AB 32 in this county, period. They're statewide goals. We fixed that earlier.
So, so then you could have it to help the state achieve or whatever.
You've got it in
Yeah.
3D.
We're going to
Yes.
contribute to it.
Right, the same
best we
fix
can.
that you made there.
Yes, and you don't need 3C.
Well, except 3C has
I mean, 3D will establish whatever target we're shooting for.
That's
Yep.
right.
So unless we want to put that in there, we can, I suppose you could just, delete 3C. It'll probably come back at some point in time through the EIR, and we'll probably revisit this question, but,
So you're saying if we take, based on the results of the GHG baseline inventory, and if establish target reductions, you're saying if we just go to AB 32, take the first sentence and we add it up into 3B, that would be enough?
or a portion of that.
And I'm saying you
Maybe-
shouldn't do that.
Yeah, we probably don't need to do that.
Because really, the first sentence of 3C just does not work, the way 32 is written.
I just think it's a goal we're not going to meet, and then we're going to end up eating that whole sentence.
It's actually a goal that we're not required to meet.
And AB 32, we're going to comply with AB 32. That's what D is all about. B is a tool that Mr. Maurer believes that we need to facilitate that. Fine. But having putting a number on it, A, is not required. If the state wants to throw a number at us that it requires us to do, then let them do that. I hope they don't. But there's no other reason for 3C.
So it sounds like, at least for now, and we can kind of continue with this section here about from the public, but that 3B stays as it is, 3C deletions, and then 3D had some revisions to it. Right?
I think you're right.
What did you say about 3C?
3B stays the same
3Cs gets deleted, 3D had revisions.
with changes.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we'll leave it at that for now, and we'll have public comment. When we finish this section, any other comments?
No.
No.
No? Public comment now, or you want to tackle another one?
That was an awful lot. Let's let them have
Okay.
an opportunity.
So at this point, if there's members of the public that'd like to address the commission on air quality greenhouse gas implementation measures, page 18.
I apologize for interrupting earlier. I was trying to help you guys out. You seem kind of stuck on the 15% or some arbitrary 15%. What the California Air Resource Board says is that AB 32 requires California to reduce its greenhouse gas emissions to 1990 levels by 2020. So that's their goal. The thing is, they don't even know what the 1990 levels were. They weren't even taking measurements at that time. It wasn't even on the radar in any big way anyway. So that's just what I wanted to point out is don't get caught up into a 15% reduction, because that isn't in the law. It's reducing greenhouse gas emissions to 1990 levels by 2020 And that's just a few years away.
If they don't know what that level was, how can you?
Well, no,
Exactly.
It's
the whole thing's-
431 million metric tons of carbon dioxide.
Yeah,
That was established by CARB.
Yeah,
And
no, it's all ridiculous.
And that's, I'm sure, a mathematical model that they've figured
There
out
was a
somehow. I don't know how they
meeting,
did it.
there was a meeting with a presentation by an official from presenting this whole concept to a board of supervisors. I think it was in Siskiyou County, I believe, I'm not sure, I don't remember now, but the gentleman admitted that they didn't even know what the levels were from 1990s, and that was from a few years ago. So, thank you.
Thank you.
So it was theoretical modeling that produced a number.
Yeah, this was something I got off the CARB website.
Then I guess theoretical modeling with respect to reductions is okay too.
Yes.
Next?
Next.
Hi, Tom Sullivan, Arnold. I was watching David trying to make his point over there, and his head was about ready to explode until, what he's trying to say is if old Tom Sullivan left Arnold, went over to Sonora because he couldn't buy what he wants to buy in Calaveras County, he goes on a 70-mile round trip to do that. 35 miles each way. Now, if somewhere near Angels Camp, there was a store where he could buy socks for less than 20 bucks a pair, and that's what Tom Sullivan wears. He wears those cheap socks. He'd make a 40-mile round trip, almost cutting his trip in half. Now, there were some statistics that came out. I'm trying to remember them. I'm not sure I'm right. But there was something like $300,000 spent out of this county per month by people who go out of the county to shop. Let's say Tom Sullivan, every time he went out of the county, spent $150. And everybody else did too. That comes out to 2,000 trips to spend that amount of money. Now, if you can cut 2,000 trips in half, do you suppose you're saving something on the greenhouse gases?
Oh, absolutely.
That's the point. But we have to go out of the county for it. If we get here, we would be cutting our greenhouse gases. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Can we have a Macy's?
No, we got an asphalt plant, no Macy's.
Well, that produces more greenhouse.
Peter Reyes, General Inn.
I thought you'd want a Nordstrom.
Folks, you got to remember, you try to please somebody in Sacramento. And I fully respect and understand. You got my sympathy. It's hard to fly with the Eagles when you're dealing with turkeys in Sacramento, folks. Because they are having a real problem, and you guys taking it real seriously, which I appreciate and respect, and I want to thank you. But remember who you're dealing with. And there's a bunch of turkeys in Sacramento, from top to bottom. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else?
God, I hope my mind doesn't go out on me. Oh, Jesus. Well, first of all, on this
I'm sorry,
subject here.
could you state your name for the
Robert
record?
Garibaldi.
Thank you, and this is for people that aren't here, especially. They don't
yeah.
see you.
Burned out rancher. Anyway, I'll give you an example. I hate to put down Calaveras County, but Amador is like a magnet drawing a lot of our people over there, and they're shopping over there. I'm sure you guys been over there and see what kind of businesses they have and everything over there. I mean, they got everything. You go down San Andreas, what do you got? I mean, come on now. We need businesses over here and development so we can create jobs and keep people here. I mean, maybe you've heard this over and over, but I mean, it's the truth. And anyway, but getting to my situation on my ranch, that's what I forgot about. It's concerning the greenhouse gases. I'm burned out over there. Everything is burnt. Yeah, I can leave everything to nature and just let it melt down. But I want to get some money out of this stuff. And maybe I don't want to look at this stuff. Maybe I want to burn everything. Is that going to help green gases? You're going to have a lot of people like me doing that. I looked into bio plants. They're closing them all down. How can we even take our wood in there so they burn them up into energy? But they're closing them down because it doesn't pay. I guess the state doesn't finance them anymore or something. Well, I mean, everything is against us. The salvage logging, we don't get no money for the logs. I mean, it's ridiculous. We do need help here. If the county can work something out with the state or get something going, I mean, it is ridiculous, trying to clean up our properties. Anyway, and the pollution's only gonna get worse, believe me, if we clean them up. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? All right. So are there any changes, or can we move on? Based on the testimony?
March ahead.
I think we're okay.
Okay, all
So
right.
the conclusion was 3C is eliminated, and we have the modifications for 3D.
Right.
Okay.
All right, so scenic resources.
I don't have anything.
Me either.
I'm good.
Be still, my heart.
I could talk about it for a while if you want.
Recreation?
Zip.
I'm good on that. We worked it all out last time. Good job on the corrections, Peter.
Oh,
Thank
you're
you.
throwing me over the edge, man.
Well, you said this meeting would only last 2 hours today when I got here.
Yeah, I know, well, I was
Which
wrong.
2 hours were you talking
Yeah, I know,
about?
I meant 2 hour segments.
The last 2 pages.
Oh, no.
All right, wait, cultural resources, come on.
I'm good on that, too.
Oh, cultural, I'm good. I don't have any more notes, period.
I don't either. Ted, what do you got for us?
Don't say anything, Ted. I'll buy you another hot dog next time we go to the senior center. So are there public comments regarding either of those 3 sections? Scenic resources, recreation, and cultural? Pardon me?
We already
We already
discussed that
talked
earlier.
about the water, yeah.
We didn't hear that last part.
The last part of the water? I'm not sure what,
What you said, we didn't
oh, I'm asking if there's anyone in the public that would like to present any comments on the implementation measures for scenic resources, recreation resources, or cultural resources. This would be your opportunity. Sure. Sorry, maybe I was speaking fast in my
She was so
excitement.
excited about
I was.
getting out of here.
You were flirting with the gentleman over there.
Well, that too.
That's it, you
Yeah.
know, it's hard to control yourself. Peter Ridge, Jenny Lynn.
Our old computers don't fit that.
Is there a reduction in comment periods at the end?
Yeah, they're 3 minutes now.
I could learn to dislike you.
Yeah,
Go
please go ahead.
Dislike her or what my comment?
Comment.
Both.
Okay, I just want to bring something there was a discussion earlier, and it's related to this part, is what's bringing money into this county? And there was a big deal about how much tourist money we couldn't really verify and so on. Folks, there's one thing that brings more money, could bring more money, is more money to this county, and that's called water. And people are gonna come up here partly for the water. Not everybody want to float down a river, but you have fishing and water. And I'll tell you something else. There's a lot of people want our water. They can't drink it, they can't eat it, but they can't live without it. And that water means more to this county. I don't care if you're a farmer or just a yuppie or somebody just came in from downtown Oakland. To everybody in this county, that water could mean so much economically, power generation, recreation, tourism, and every level. I'm not going to go into the water districts maybe later on, but keep it in mind. Besides, that brings tourism also. But what water we have in this county, could be mind-boggling. You could be totally energy independent. You can have fisheries, and all the flood zones can have little fisheries and fishing. So keep it in the back of your head. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Tanya Dawson from Valley Springs, and I just had a general concept on the scenic, cultural, and recreational. I'd like to leave that to the free market. I don't want to be subsidizing any of that. If people want to preserve cultural resources, let them do it. If they want to preserve scenic resources, let the people that are interested in doing that do that. And recreation, let people that are interested in developing recreation do that. Leave it up to the free market, let them do that. I don't want to be having to subsidize that, or I don't want it mandated on people by the government. And also with the preservation of oak trees and such too. If people want to preserve oak trees, that's up to them. Let them do it. If they want to do it, that's great. They can buy the trees and preserve them. But I don't want to see people mandated to do those things. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? All right, so we will,
Can I make a comment regarding one of these?
yes, you may.
Okay. I wanted to comment about what Mr. Garibaldi had to say, and that was, I had the rare misfortune, I guess, of having been born and raised in Jackson, and I was gone for about 25 years, and I showed up on the scene again, came over here, and I ended up on the board for the Chamber of Commerce, and I happened to mention in one of the board meetings that we could hold a board meeting in Safeway in Jackson, because that's the only time we could get a quorum of the local business people, because they were over there doing their shopping. And that wasn't very popular. And then I decided I would make it one step further. And I said I moved from Jackson to San Andreas. I could have moved to the People's Republic of China and had less culture shock. And that wasn't very popular either. And to this day, I still get reminded of that. That's been 30 years ago or so. But it really is a big difference between just across the river. And one of the reasons, though, I just thought you ought to know, is there used to be a state legislator over in Placerville by the name of Swift Berry. And we called him Nifty Swifty from Highway 50. And he was doing everything he could to get business over there. And he was very successful. But the reason he was successful was Placerville is on, where two highways that go someplace. Jackson's on two highways that go someplace. Sonora, not quite as much. And San Andreas, it's not, there's no, Highway 49 goes someplace, but 26 doesn't really go anyplace. And it's a seasonal road. So until they get over that, you're really not going to see a lot of great growth here, because the business just isn't here, unfortunately.
But the kind of businesses you're talking about there, Ted, Safeway and whatnot, that's not because it's on two highways. It's just people shopping there, to live there.
Because they live where those highways go someplace.
It's also just counting rooftops. That's what they do. It's, and you draw a circle, and how many can you get? As most major retails know, we are within driving distance to some of those circles, whether it be Sonora or Stockton or Jackson, that already has those regional shopping presence. So with that, do we need to go through all of the particular changes, or I think we did a little summary at
We
each of
probably
them.
want to have a vote to say, yes, we agree with all the changes that we made.
But that's what I'm wondering, do we need to go
Do you
through
want me
them
just
all
to
again?
quickly walk through the ones we changed?
Fine.
Okay, so starting on page 5. The paragraph on vegetation, we're going to incorporate Colleen Platt's suggested language. We modified the last paragraph on page 6, striking technically and striking the sentence, future funding for regional transportation projects, etc.
I'm sorry, sentence what?
Future funding for regional transportation projects will be tied to the SCS. It was a duplicate sentence that was, it's the
Right, it's all
second to last sentence. We're striking that.
Right.
Moving on to the page 10, it's McCallum Hill, not Hills. Policy 2.1, minor edits, buffers and setbacks, comma. 2.5, we struck plant. 3.4, we modified to read, develop, and adopt.
No, 2.8, we
2.8
struck
we
plant,
struck plant.
not
Yeah.
2.5.
Oh, 2.8, yes,
Yeah,
sorry.
okay,
Glasses.
it's all right.
3.4, we modified, struck the line to reduce greenhouse gases within Calaveras County, and instead inserted to assist in achieving emission reduction goals of AB 32. We modified policy 4.1, so it's a component of the economy, not the full economy. Modified implementation measure.
4.1, what did we do?
Pardon me?
On 4.1, what did we do?
Put in the word of the,
As it's a component of the economy.
Scenic
And-
beauty
yes.
and the tourism component of the economy.
Right.
What the
Okay,
last
good.
part reads.
Yeah.
Yeah. COSA, the title is Open Space Zoning Ordinance, and there's the additional text that I have read in the record previously about reviewing the code and adopting an ordinance pursuant to 6591 for the first part of that sentence.
And we're striking the word district out of the heading.
Yes.
Replacing it with ordinance.
COS 1E on page 16, we strike continue to. 2D, we struck the last sentence and added at the end of the first sentence, and address pre-development removal of oaks. 2F, the prior edits that I missed will be put back in. We deleted 3E.
sorry, Peter, on 2D, what did you, that correction? I had us-
2D, we struck the last sentence,
Okay, good, that's what I.
and we added the phrase at the end of the first sentence.
Okay,
Well,
good.
could you review the changes previously made to 2F that didn't get put in?
I can if you need it.
Support efforts where appropriate to identify and acquire high-value biological resource areas from willing sellers on private lands for the purpose of mitigating impacts to biological resources. Three C we deleted.
Wait a minute, 3E?
See,
C, cat. 3D, we modified. Develop a greenhouse gas reduction plan outlining the strategies, goals, and actions for contributing to an overall reduction in greenhouse gas emissions consistent with AB 32.
Right, but 3E, the page back, we've
We
deleted it,
deleted that one,
correct?
yes.
Okay.
And that was all the changes. Now, we didn't get back to Commissioner Wooster's suggestion of another goal and other associated policies.
but can we have some, are we in agreement what, as revised so far?
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay,
3D
so we don't have to
changed.
revisit that, we're good.
3C is cut.
3C is cut,
3B is unchanged.
unchanged.
Good.
All right,
Okay,
so
now I'm caught
Commissioner
up.
Wooster?
Now we're back to Kelly.
Before we go to him, I just want to say something real quick. Mr. Raz we had indicated to him if he had better language on the water issue, that we would readdress that, and I know that.
No, this was on the
Public
upcoming
facilities.
public facilities and services element.
Right,
So if he had some specific language that he wanted
That
to
he
send
could-
to me,
right.
I'd be happy to take a look at that
Okay,
and
I'm sorry for
figure out how to incorporate.
So Kelly, what do you got?
Okay, well, we are on the conservation and open space element. And the conservation element is conservation, development, and utilization of natural resources, including water, forests, wildlife, and other natural resources. So what I'm about to talk about, I think belongs here instead of someplace else. The draft general plan reads as if all is well with the county's forests and woodlands and rangelands, and it's not. Director Maurer and Mr. Garibaldi have made it clear today that much more needs to be done. As our forests and our other lands are overstocked with trees and brush, creating way too much fuel. And we need to get these forests and rangelands and woodlands back to the way they were before fire suppression. And there have been articles in the paper about this. There are recent studies about this, referred to in Enterprise articles. Ted Shannon had a good guest opinion piece in the Enterprise on February 12th. But so far, our general plan doesn't say anything about that. And I'm thinking that we need a new goal, and it cuts across, it affects a lot of things, water, biological, air quality, recreation, public safety. And the goal would read something like this: healthy forests, woodlands, and rangelands, free of unnatural accumulations of overstocked trees and brush, comma, close to their historic, natural, pre-fire suppression and condition, thereby increasing water supplies, wildlife habitat, and forage, and decreasing the risk of catastrophic wildfires. That would be the goal. I could just go through the policies and then
That'd be great.
come
Why
back.
don't you
and
why don't you give us a big picture?
I'll give you the whole thing.
Full Monday.
Okay. Policies. Forests should be thinned periodically and burned to remove underbrush and overstocked stands of trees. One policy. Oak woodlands should be thinned and burned if needed to remove dead and dying trees and avoid overstock conditions. New policy. Lands covered with brush, including live oak, chaparral/chamise, and manzanita, should be burned periodically to remove impenetrable thickets and allow diversity of plant life. Those are the policies. Implementation measures. 1, encourage initiatives to utilize vegetation removed from forests and oak woodlands and brushlands for energy production. Number 2, work with water agencies that use water generated in Calaveras County to share costs of watershed management, including vegetation removal, to increase water flows. Number 3, encourage the U.S. Forest Service, BLM, CAL FIRE, the Department of Fish and Wildlife, and other interested agencies to support the increased use of prescribed burns on public and private lands. Number 4, work to modify air quality regulations to accommodate prescribed burns on public and private lands. And while I haven't done this and probably won't be able to, at some point, if we're going to do something like this, we need to include in the background report an accurate recitation of what the conditions of our lands actually are, instead of pretending that they're just fine.
So I have a question though, Kelly, as far as like all of the implementation measures, I mean, who would be responsible for that? I mean, this is a county general plan. As you notice, we have like responsible entities, might be planning department, might be building, might be, I mean.
I have not got that far.
So I get, but I think that's the question is how do we as a county implement that goal and those policies?
Well, one thing you could do, and actually this is one of the important ones, we have our own air quality control district, and it has a board of directors. And it has been a serious deterrent to private landowners controlling their brush lands. Because you could be all set up with CAL FIRE, you could have dozers clear around the property you're going to burn. You can be ready to go, and they shut you down. And they'll do it time after time. Those rules have got to be changed, or we're not going to get anywhere. So that's one. The other ones, I'd have to think about and talk to people who know how this county operates better than I do. What I am telling you is, if we don't do some of these things, it's just going to get worse and worse and worse.
Right, and I guess, and I mean, I think that's a legitimate, issue and something that would potentially fall within the county's purview, but right now, is there, other than that, is there some restriction that doesn't allow a property owner to do a prescribed burn or do clearing or manual, chipping, whatever, on their own property? Is there some reason they can't do that now? Because so much of the land that we're talking about is under private ownership.
A lot of it is under private ownership, and that is the major impediment. Now, there's a practical restriction, which is you can't very well burn your property unless you're set up to make sure it doesn't spread to somebody else's property. And that essentially means you've got to get CAL FIRE with your program. And they are actually amenable to doing that kind of thing. So it's mainly the air quality people.
Right, and I could see that, because the other thing is, like, if you get to, Tanya, she's not here, like, her major issue, I think, would be that is, again, telling private property owners what they should do on their own property. It's like mandating some sort of clearance for them, rather than, because right now I think it's all voluntary. There's nothing other than what you've said about the Air Pollution Control District's responsibility in getting, approval of CAL FIRE.
It would still be all voluntary. Nobody's going to force private people to clear their land.
Okay.
I'm not suggesting that.
Okay.
What I'm trying to do is to get the regulations that are stopping that from happening.
Right, so then
Changed.
other than the Air Pollution Control District, what other regulations are in place that would prevent someone from doing that?
I don't know of any.
But I think that's a legitimate, and maybe we should be talking about that, is that there should be some...
Maybe it becomes more along the lines of the encouragement of, we have a lot of policies that say we encourage private property owners to do
Right.
certain things. And that, part of it is the coordinated effort between multiple property owners. You've got a whole area of, 10 and 20 acre parcels. And for them to effectively control the brush and the overstock conditions, they really have to work cooperatively together. And if there's a comprehensive program that can be developed, maybe even a funding mechanism. Not that the county's going to pay for it, but there may be some other funding mechanism. There was something I heard about last week where the what's it called, the Strategic Growth Council is looking at a grant program to help restore our forests, because they see that as a means to reduce greenhouse gases by having healthy forests out there. And mature, large trees trap more, and hold more carbon than brushland. And so where there's, ability to enhance that, then maybe there's a program, the whole concept that Supervisor Edson's talking about, if you get rid of the, some of that understory, that undergrowth that is choking out the forest, that it may have an ability to retain more water or hold it for a longer period of time with bigger trees. And so there's a lot of different factors in there. Maybe what we could do at this point, I'd love to hear public comment on it, but when we're done with that, rather than like say, okay, I could figure out how to incorporate it into the document. We bring that component back. There was a little bit of the language I'd sort of like to tweak a little bit without changing the context of what you're saying, and then we can, have that public debate about these new policies.
But just that component?
Just that component. Everything else is done.
Before we put the whole thing to bed.
Before we put the whole thing to bed. So that we could bring that back next week.
Okay, I would have a comment about the difference between your policy statements and your implementation measures, where in your policy statements, you included, burning, controlled burns and whatnot, more than once. Whereas in your implementation measures, you were talking about, finding ways to get rid of it without burning it, right?
Partly.
Okay, so can we, to be consistent with the implementation measures, it seems to me that you would not talk so much about the burning in the policy statements, but simply the removal of, removal by whatever means, and then in the implementation measures, we find ways to get rid of it without burning it, if possible.
I think
Whatever,
I did in the policy, I did start off with the forest should be thinned
yeah,
periodically.
as the goal.
As a
So I
policy.
think that there's some,
Well, I think you made a goal
Tweak,
statement that would be, in our numbering, would be,
The goal statement doesn't say how you're going to do it. It just says the condition you want to
So
be
this
at.
is what we want to achieve.
Right.
oh, it would be COS 3. Now, I thought you were making a goal statement that would be under
Well, This
biological
would be a new, this
resources.
would be a new goal, and the problem with sticking it into one category is it cuts across a lot of
Goes
them.
across the
Oh.
board.
It's almost has to be a goal that's like up front, a general goal.
Well, and I was thinking, we have that one sort of general measure that is sort of there without a goal or policy. Maybe this becomes part of the general category. We come up with some better name for it, I'm sure, but we just move all these back one, have this as the first.
And I have a whole lot of ideas on how you can affect that and
I
also
like the
cut
approach.
down
Yeah.
on the emissions that would be coming out of the fire stuff. So if we get that back in writing, I think there's a lot of work that we could do on that could go in a positive direction.
okay.
So if you could email me your text or hand it to me in writing.
I'll give it to you.
Give it to me, what you have.
It's
And
I'll
then-
work with Annette to make sure it's in form that somebody can read it other than me.
Because I'm
Okay.
looking at his chicken scratch from here thinking, uh-oh.
You see my chicken scratch? We probably can, it's like both of us, reading, foreign language together. We can read
Right.
each other's
Yeah,
chicken
His
scratches.
chicken scratches, there's no typos in it.
Well, if there are, you can't find them.
So with that, if there's someone in the public that would like to talk about this new idea about a new goal and addressing watershed management and fire suppression, just to give us some ideas about fashioning something.
Again, I mentioned earlier,
I'm sorry, could you state your name again?
Tom Sullivan, Arnold.
Thank you, Tom.
Again, I mentioned earlier that I was in the fire service down south, and I did some prescribed burning very successfully. However, in the advent of the legal counsel people, prescribed burning has become the least likely thing to do because of the lawsuits. However, there are times when it can be used, and I suggest your language might say the most effective way. There are some ways, as David mentioned, about being able to merchandise some of this waste product. Some of it, it keeps going back and forth as to whether or not people want to support it. Now, the Cliff Edson thing, which is basically, I can't remember the acronym for it. but
RCD.
Resource Control Group, when he's talking about burning along streams and so forth to increase the water flow and effectiveness of it. And Fire Safe Group, which is primarily through CDF, have similar goals. For instance, they both want to remove the brush along the drainages. One for fire control, the other for better water flow. Eventually, I hope, since they're running parallel at this point in time, they may be able to come to some sort of a mutual agreement, mutual joint powers agreement, whatever, to be able to both fund and efficientize, if that's a word, the project of getting rid of this unused, unnecessary brush. 100 years ago, when the Indians burned her off, we didn't have it. We had more grass and trees. And actually, that's the best way to go. I'm fully behind this project, and I've volunteered in every way I can to help with it. And I certainly would like to see it in the plan.
Thank you.
Definitely. Because it's something that is definitely a goal that will improve this county by a large percentage. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Bill McManus, Hanford Hill. About 6 years ago, there was a major change in the way the county operated, and that was out at the waste collection, yard waste collection sites. And back when the fees were set up for the dump and transfer stations and all that, the taxpayers were told that this is going to be like a forever deal. They had it worked out that they should be able to, in perpetuity, provide these services. Well, about 6 years ago, they shut down like Gene Miller's yard, where we used to be able to take brush and wood and things of that nature and dump it for free. And I guess Gene Miller was under contract by the county, and they would pay him for his services to take care of the yard waste, grind it up and get it out of the county. Really, the amount of money that was involved in that process wasn't all that much. I think they saved $115,000, $150,000, something like that, by getting out of the contract with Gene Miller. But more to the point of what Commissioner Wooster was talking about is when you want to encourage people to do something. Well, the best way to enhance that encouragement is to give them an incentive. And so people who want to clear their land now not only either have to cut the brush themselves and haul it off and pay the fees, or they have to pay a crew to come in, cut it out, put it in the trailer and haul it out and pay the fees. So if we could just get some funds restored to the yard waste, where homeowners could either do it themselves, clear their land, cut out the brush, make it more fire safe, and relieve the financial burden of having to pay for that waste to go someplace, or to make it cheaper for people who can't clear the land themselves and hire somebody to do it, that they wouldn't be involved in paying the disposal fees, which again gets charged back to the homeowner. So the encouragement goes along with incentive, and I think you'd have a lot more progress getting it done. And you certainly don't want to cut brush and haul it 50 feet down the hill and then burn it, when the whole idea is to reduce carbon emissions and all the rest of it, or greenhouse gases. So it kind of kills two birds with one stone. It's almost a win-win, that for very little money, we could get these grinders and whatnot going. Like, I use Gene Miller because that's who I used for years. Get them back online, processing this waste, reduce the cost to homeowners, whether they do it themselves or they hire it out, and then actually see some progress, real progress, in reducing the understory and the ladders and everything else that exist in the forest, especially up where I live, where, you know, it's everything from grass through manzanita trees and all the way up to the top. So I know each section of the county may be of limited benefit, but I think overall it would be of great benefit to the county to have those services restored, and then people can be incented to take care of their own property and do it in a way that's affordable and productive. Thank you.
Thank you.
Vicki Reinke, Angels Camp. I just want to say thank you for that suggestion and putting that in. It's one of those things that make you feel like we're actually going to accomplish something in the county, rather than trying to do things like tell you how many trees you can have or how much open space you need. This piece is going to be something that's going to actually do something in our county, and I think it's a great idea, and want to thank you all for saying you're going to work on it, and I think we'll all be behind you on that one. Thanks.
Thank you.
Colleen Platt. I can't absorb that quickly, so I look forward to reading whatever you said written down. I wrote down what I could and got the gist of it, but it sounds like a good idea, and we'd like to see that in writing. We all have a problem with brush management and fire suppression on all of our properties, no matter where you are in the county, and it's very expensive. If you can't do it yourself, which is almost impossible as you age, it's very expensive to hire people, and if there could be funding found, there are people that are happy to do it for you if you can afford to pay them, but it's expensive. So if there could be funds found to support fire clearance and fire suppression and brush clearing and that, I mean, you know, I know somebody the other day, they wanted to get rid of 70 foot around their house clearance of brush, and they had to hire tree companies, and they were expensive, $2,000, and it's like, wow, you know, that's really hard to do that. So if we could get it in the general plan and have policies and support to find funding, that would be great. Look forward to seeing the written statements there.
Thank you.
Can I talk to you?
Not yet.
Really?
Well, where's the public comment?
Robert Garibaldi, I appreciate what you came up with. It's a good idea. I just want to add to it that I did a lot of research. I was going to clear my property before the fire, and I looked into a track-operated mulcher, and they make these large ones that will just tear up thing through that forest and mulch it right down to the ground. I mean, it's going to be, one of those is very expensive, but if somebody in the private industry picks them up, boy, he'll have a lot of work, I think. So that's another alternative. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Not usually, no, unless, are you good with that? Oh, are you talking about chips? Yeah, I was just going to mention that because Mr. Garibaldi said there weren't any other biomass plants, but they are trying to develop one in Wilseyville at the CHIPS, California Healthy Impact Forest something.
This is a track-operated mulcher that goes through.
No, I understand. That's a different, something that we're talking about differently. I suppose you could use that to accumulate the chips, and then it's actually...
No, it lays on the ground and mulches.
Yes, no, I understand that. I'm talking about something different that is actually a biomass plant that I believe that they're trying to get a conditional use permit for. They're in the process, so that could be an alternative and something that may want to be mentioned in this, I don't know specifically in this effort, but that...
I did.
County Waste Disposal has just purchased a huge chipper. And they are also going to get, talking about getting a splitter that will split 24-inch logs into half, in which the chipper will take and chip. So that solves an awful lot of problems when you turn, once you get it into chips, now you've got something you can manage.
Right, right. So there's some efforts going on, yeah.
On the clearing, I don't have that kind of lands, but in most cases, isn't it true that you take out the brush, you don't really need to haul it away or burn it? Can't you just leave the chips on the ground?
Well, if you have chips, but you got to get chips somehow. If once you cut a tree down, you still
Sure,
got
I
a lot.
understand that, but you can grind it and leave it.
Well, part of it is access too. You know, I mean, if you had,
Doesn't work?
well, it's hard to get a chipper or someplace to where, you know, some of these slopes, I mean, how do you get
a
it?
big one, but, okay. Okay, so, okay, I was thinking that in most cases you could grind up the small stuff and just leave it lay there, and you don't have to burn it or haul it off to be burned.
I think if you, like the tool that Mr. Garibaldi was talking about, which I believe that, I've just recently heard someone purchase a piece of equipment like that up in District 2 somewhere, a private person, but it actually goes through and takes like small trees, and it does, it just like shreds it. Yeah.
So, you know, I think we're talking about different scale, you know, small landowner, you know, I have a little, you know, 3 horsepower chipper and, you know, I can feed it for a couple hours and then I can get, you know, a pile of brush. But if you're talking about, you know,
Acres and acres.
acres and acres, tens to hundreds of acres, no,
Right.
no. You have to do it at industrial scale or you've
Yes,
got to
we
be able to burn it.
Okay.
Yeah.
My other comment that, it's about the brush clearing aspect of it, where manpower can do the job instead of burning, okay, so now there's somebody making some money doing this. I don't know what programs are in place, and maybe there's jobs in it for people who don't currently have a job, but my only concern with that, and I hope we can put as many people to work doing this as possible, but I would like for it for public funds not to be competing with somebody who's in the private business of doing this kind of work, and we end up killing somebody's business because we're...
I don't think we're looking at a large source of local revenue, you know, public monies to be able to do this. You know, they might be able to
Well, I was
leverage
thinking
some state
outside
money
money.
or federal money that come in and would pay a local firm to be able to do some of this work.
And then they in turn can make
Exactly,
larger crews,
yeah.
go after it.
But I don't see, you know, the county hiring a brush reduction crew in the immediate near future.
No, I was thinking maybe they would be tempted to get a grant that does this, and then somebody who's spent a lot of money to buy a machine is out of business because there's a public program taxpayer-funded thing that.
That grant has to go to a body that's going to do the work, so that's likely going to be the person locally who does that kind of work, so.
So, but I think we're kind of getting in the weeds a little bit. Let's see
Yeah.
what we've got on sort of the bigger picture, so.
So you'll give that to Annette, we'll decipher it, and then I'll figure out how to work it into the document, and hopefully we'll have that back to you by next Thursday.
Okay, so we do have a meet.
We have a meeting next Thursday, we have a regular public agenda item. The circulation element will be brought back, we had some changes and some issues to work out, so that's ready to come back. I have the background report edits done, and everything pretty much packaged up. Now, we talked about 2 other things you'd like to see added to that. Do you want me to wait until we're all done with all the rest of the discussion before we bring back the technical background report, or do we want to sort of take it now and look at all the edits and all the changes we've made so far, and if there's more we want to add, we can always add more to it later? What do you think would be the most effective way to handle that?
Well, you could always put it on the agenda. If we get to it, we get to it.
I'm just saying, today we identified 2 other areas we'd like to see information added to the background report.
I see what you're saying.
And so we may end up finding that there's other information, gee, that would be in the background report.
Maybe perhaps we should wait till we're. I agree. Yeah, till it's all in there.
I'm thinking maybe next week, we're talking about reviewing the changes to the circulation element that we've already been through.
Right.
And
That
was the
shouldn't
only
take
thing-
too long.
Well, that
Famous
was
last
sort
words.
of, yeah, that was
Well,
kind
they
of the
weren't nearly
situation
as
today.
extensive as
But
today.
we're not starting the safety.
No.
Okay, in that case, we need something to fill out.
Well, there's a public item
There's
too.
one public item, but it shouldn't take too long. It's a conditional use permit.
Well,
hopefully
your
it'll be-
choice.
Well, it's not
I
my
would-
choice, but I don't think I want to get into a project that's going to be added to as we go along. I think, well,
Unless we say, yeah, this is good so far.
I would
we'll
be,
do some
that was
opening-
my thinking, is
Yeah.
that you take what he's got to fill out the day, and then when there's another little section added for this new stuff, we can plop it in later. I mean, short days don't bother me, but I just assume
short days. What are those?
work the day if there's something more that can be
Yeah.
accomplished.
Oh, I could, it's really at the.
So the
pleasure of
last
the
2
commission.
elements that we'll have before us is the safety element and the public facilities and services element. I just started yesterday reviewing the comments and making edits to the public facilities. I have our consultant, Amy Augustine, working on the safety element. That probably won't be ready to go until sometime in April. I need to start working on the community plans. We've got the land use map still to address. I've got a lot of work to do, and so there probably will be a little bit of a lag time as far as getting more general plan stuff to you once we wrap up what we have done already. So I think probably would be most effective use of our time, keep things moving, is to let's look at what we have so far in the revisions to the background report. We look at the circulation element. Hopefully, I'll have the public services element to you in a couple of weeks, so we can keep moving forward. We can continually add stuff to the background report.
Well,
and-
based on that, I think that makes sense, since we don't have anything, I mean, if we had these other 2 to go right too, but we don't.
We don't. There's a lot of work to do. We have a lot of comments, particularly on the safety element, and there's a lot of technical requirements that we have to meet, particularly in response to CAL FIRE's comments on that. And so that's why it's just going to take a little more time.
Okay, so I think you could go ahead and queue it up, I guess.
Okay.
Yeah, okay. Anything else? Otherwise, we have another public comment period. Any other reports? Even though I think we jumped ahead, but we're gonna have, might as well finish that up. No?
No.
Okay, so this is a public comment period. Again, if there's anyone in the audience who'd like to address the commission on an item that's not on our agenda today, speak the truth.
Bill McManus, Hanford Hill. I really want to thank you for rushing through all that general plan stuff so we could get to the truth tour again. I know you've been waiting for it. Happen to have 2 more elements we can add to it that will put you ahead of the Board of Supervisors. So you'll have bragging rights for at least a week as I catch up with them on Tuesday. But next Thursday, again, you'll be ahead of them. One of the great lies, misrepresentations that we've heard through this whole process. And it was given in person by the head of the Calaveras cartel that there have been 4,000 jobs created in Calaveras County relating to the marijuana industry. Well, no one seemed to, you guys didn't hear it, but it was at the board. No one seemed to react much to that. But really, the news of the day should have been Calaveras County on the front page of every newspaper in this country, that one county in America has finally achieved zero unemployment. If you look through information, and the board was given this information, I apologize, my computer's out of business right now. I was going to bring you the documents. It's a 25-year history of the workforce, both employed and unemployed, by month in Calaveras County that comes from the labor market information at EDD. In researching that, 4,000 would seem to pop up and be fairly obvious. Over a 25-year period, from month to month, year to year, and even 5-year periods, the numbers never varied by more than 200 or 300. So that leads me to believe that these are not real jobs. They may be people working out there, but they're not legal jobs. Because if they were employees, they would have a W-4, which EDD would pick up. If they were subcontractors, they would have a 1099, which EDD would pick up. If they were just business owners, each and every one of them, they would have a Schedule C, which EDD would pick up on. And so we have people out there who are working without workman's compensation, without state disability. They're not having their taxes withheld. They're not paying Social Security. The people who pay them in cash are not contributing to their Social Security with the matching funds from an employer. So the fact that the lie is that we have 4,000 people working here paying taxes. Well, we don't. We may have 4,000 people working here, but it's an underground illegal economy. So I'll leave that one up to you. You can do with it what you please. And I'll get those numbers to you if you want them. Also, the board, in trying to help people in the burn area, have kind of misrepresented the intention of the Board of Supervisors or the duty of Calaveras County. And as for burn victims, to be given a 3-year extension before they have to rebuild their house so that they can grow marijuana on their land. Well, that's bad enough right there, because the ordinance somewhere along the line is going to require that a dwelling be on the land before you can do an outdoor grow. In addition to that, this delays by 3 years that property acquiring a dwelling, which can be assessed, and the county can start charging the proper amount of property tax on it. So that depresses the market even further. So, and in the meantime, the little twist in the whole thing is that people who got burned out in the Butte fire, a lot of them who didn't have insurance, received funds of one sort or another from PG&E or FEMA or whatever, and have left. In turn, they have sold their property to people who are investing in dirt and water to grow marijuana. So are we going to have relief given to people who were carpetbaggers after the Butte fire, or do we restrict this benefit to people who were a victim, they lived there before and they're living there afterwards, and do we give them 3 years to grow marijuana before rebuilding their house? So that's lie number 4 in the big lineup. So it's something we'll probably hear about again. So you heard it here first.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else?
Robert Garibaldi. I originally was from Oakland, California, in the Bay Area. Then I got out of my area because of the city and because of drugs and everything. I figured, well, I'd go to Mendocino County. So I'm up there, and I found that the drugs were even worse up there. I mean, everybody should rent for 6 months in a place and find out how the place is. But anyway, we bought right away, and anyway, the drug culture started up there. Well, bottom line, Mendocino county is a total loss. As far as I'm concerned, the drug people have taken over. There's more drugs going on in Mendocino County, and Mendocino County's really screwed up. I hope you folks don't let this happen in Calaveras County. I know you've got a problem right now, but don't let it get any bigger and try to fight it down. That's all I want to say. Thank you.
Thank you.
Just a quick clarification. Next week, we're going to review the changes that we did today to the conservation open space?
No, I think
No?
we're done
We're done?
with that, except
Okay.
it's just, we're going to be looking at
The
the
new-
proposed new goal and
New
policies.
goals and policy,
Uh-huh.
okay, and then bringing circulation element revisions
There were a
back?
few change revisions
That's
based on
coming back?
planning commission that will be back on.
Okay.
And then also the technical background report.
Okay, that is coming back, because we
Yes.
were just agreeing about what you decided.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? All right, anything from the commissioners? No, all right, we are
Adjourned.
adjourned. No, I know, I'm just like, are we adjourned or we're continuing?